global government is the most effective way to address the world's biggest problems because it creates a unified approach to solving issues that affect everyone. Different countries often have conflicting interests, which makes solving global challenges very difficult. And we believe that without a global government, countries may prioritize their own short-term interests over the long-term well-being of the planet and humanity. So a single government would ensure that laws and policies are consistent worldwide, and leading to more effective solutions. So our goal in this debate is to demonstrate that establishing a single global government would lead to more effective management of global issues, which can promote fairness among all nations and also promote peace and stability worldwide. So what does the status quo look like? The status quo is fundamentally inefficient because countries compete even when cooperation benefits everyone. So whether it is for national benefits, individuality, or uniqueness, there is so much unnecessary conflicts that bloom from the single reason that we are not allies. So how would this global government function? A global government does not mean raising cultures, languages, or local autonomy. There are still state laws that guarantee autonomy to an extent. Instead, it is a federal structure that operates on top of different countries and their governments. This means that if we refer to the system of politics in the US, the individual countries would have state governments and the global government would be a federal government. So while the state governments are free to create laws on their own with the approval of this federal government, what lies in the federal government's principles cannot be contradicted by the state laws. And also, if there are conflicts between states, then it will be handled by the global government. Also, local governments still handle culture, education, and regional policies, and the global government handles issues that already transcend borders. And to make sure that the equity system is applicable, like Congress in the US and in the UN, there will be representatives that are elected in each country, regardless of their population or their global status, most likely their individual presidents. And moving on to the first argument, the premise of this argument is that many conflicts and wars originate from disagreements between nations that cannot be resolved peacefully because each country acts in its own self-interest. So when countries compete for resources or territory or power, tensions escalate and often lead to violence or destruction and suffering. So we believe that these conflicts are led by a lack of a universal authority that can negotiate disputes fairly. So a global government would act as the ultimate authority that can prevent these conflicts from escalating into war, because it would have the power to mediate disputes in a fair and impartial manner. So instead of countries resorting to war to settle disagreements, they would turn to the global government for resolution, and this central authority would have the power to enforce peace treaties or prevent military actions that threaten the global stability and development. The impact of this would be enormous because it would lead to fewer wars, fewer deaths, and less destruction worldwide. War often begins when nations feel they have no peaceful way to settle disputes, but with the global government, we believe that peaceful resolution becomes the default. And this would create a safer and more peaceful world where nations focus on shared goals rather than conflict. Moving on to the second argument, the premise of this argument is that many of the problems that lead to international conflicts are inherently global in nature because they cannot be effectively managed by individual countries alone. Issues such as climate change, pandemics, terrorism, and illegal arms trade cross borders and threaten entire regions or even the whole planet. We believe that these problems are interconnected and their solutions demand coordinated action that no single nation can handle alone. Therefore, a global government would be the only entity capable of addressing these complex challenges effectively. First, let's identify the real problem. Regardless of their actual efforts to come together, when their perspectives are so different to the extent that they can't come up with a conclusive solution, they won't be able to solve the global issues most efficiently and effectively. So if their perspectives are acting as drawbacks, that's a problem that needs to be solved. So by solving global issues the fastest and most effective, we solve the burden set on prop, and with that, so proud to propose.
Moving on to my definitions, how do you define global governments? Global governments mean global government, like it refers to a hypothetical centralized political authority that would have jurisdiction over the entire world. Why are we debating this topic? The world that God is trying to make is problematic. Why? First of all, there's easier corruption, there's only one government, and there's a bigger world. More terrorists, lesser governments, bigger danger. Like for example, like people like terrorists or certain groups can easily target one type of government, and like we can easily target the one type of global government. If exploited by only one government, there will be loads of money and therefore giving them the incentive to get targeted more often. First of all, and secondly, unifying people under one flag cannot always create harmony. No, will never create harmony. Why? For example, which political system? For example, democracy or democracy or communism, different cultures and experiences, each with different opinions on the same topic. For example, in Asia, gay LGBTQ is considered bad, but in America, it is considered normal. How can you deal with problems like this? First of all, moving to rebuttals. Oh, no, no. Also, we provide a different solution, but for example, like UN, which is built on allies but does not control everything. Moving on to my rebuttal, power conflict would not disappear under a global government. It would simply move inside the system itself. People will still disagree over religion, ideology, resources, culture, and political representation. In fact, the stakes become even higher because controlling one global government means controlling the entire world's power. Instead of wars between countries, there will be massive internal conflicts, separatist movements, and stuff like the resistance or stuff like that, and political struggles between different regions and groups competing for influence. Smaller populations may feel dominated by large or wealthier regions, causing resentment and instability. A single government does not eliminate human disagreement. It concentrates all conflict into one central system, making failures and tensions far more dangerous on a global scale. Moving on to my first argument, it's easier to corrupt. What will we prove? Government is a big target, and if they are underside, you can do whatever you want. In their world, government has insane power. We can literally do whatever they want, cover up anything, and control anyone. If you don't like someone, we can dispose of them. And second of all, big and common targets. They are big and common targets for people with negative intentions. If they somehow persuade the government, they can make society extremely dangerous. For example, they will be able to violate different types of human rights, or like they will actually target different types of people or stuff like that. There are no backup plans for mistakes. If a local government makes a bad law, people can move to a different city or state. If a single government makes a huge mistake, it affects every single person on earth, and there's nowhere else to go. So if Gov gets affected or targeted by such groups, the entire population will be negatively affected by this. What does it look like? If government doesn't fit their values, if citizens' values, we can't move away, or even if they are corrupt, they can't take refuge to other countries. Millions of people lose access to basic needs like food, healthcare, and safety. Trust is completely destroyed because people realize the system is actually rigged against them. Even if a government team argues that a single global government can create equal rules for everyone, corruption guarantees that those rules will only protect the powerful. Moving on to my second argument. What will I prove? People live better and safer lives when there are many different countries instead of one single government. Why is this true? First, a single government cannot listen to everyone. When government tries to rule the entire planet, it cannot pay attention to the unique needs, laws, and cultures of every different people or group of people. If a government is not paying attention to local problems, it cannot solve them. Secondly, citizens can do things to fix bad laws, not just sit. In a world with many countries, if a government becomes unfair or citizens can protest, vote for new leaders, or even move to a different country. And furthermore, countries copy good ideas while getting stuck. When different countries try different ways to run schools, fix roads, or help the poor, they can learn from each of our successes and different types of each of our successes. A single government uses the same rule everywhere, meaning one bad mistake ruins everything for the whole world. What does this look like? Instead of having local leaders who understand the specific needs of a city, a massive slow government offices thousands of miles away make a single law for the entire planet, but does not work on most of the community in the first place. Let's look at the impacts. People are safer because no single leader can control the whole world, and laws are better because they are made by people who actually understand the local area, who actually understand the local area. Therefore, for these reasons, I'm proud to propose.
1. Humanity has reached a point where our biggest threats no longer stop at borders. Climate change does not need a passport. Pandemics do not really respect sovereignty. Nuclear missiles do not ask for visas before they destroy cities, right? Yet we still govern ourselves through fragmented system built for a divided world. Proposition stands for the simple idea that if our world and our problems are global, our solutions must also be global to propose. Now, moving on to some rebuttals then. Firstly, about corruption and global tyranny. We already told you in our setup that to make sure that the equity system is applicable, like the Congresses in the US, there will be representatives that are elected in each country regardless of their population or global status. Most likely their individual presidents or most likely their representatives, right? There are enough checks and balances within this hypothetical society to balance out tyranny. Secondly, though, about how the UN already works and there's no there's no need for a new system. We honestly believe that the UN or WTO does not really function properly anymore, and the US and China just dominate, so they don't really have any purpose to begin with. Why is this the case though? Under the UN, if two powerful countries fight, the UN mostly negotiates. They enforcement depends on like the member states, and veto powers also block action, right? The difference on our world is that there is no independent national militaries competing internationally anymore. Conflicts become more like internal disputes within one system rather than wars between separate sovereign and powerful states. Thirdly, though, about how one government means one failure destroys everything, right? The world is already interconnected, Judge. One pandemic or one financial crash or war or climate disaster already affects everyone globally. The difference in our side is that in status quo, chaotic fragmented responses happen within the society, but on proposition side, coordinated response capacities can also happen on our side of the house. Now, lastly, then, about how different countries need different policies, right? We say that is exactly why Proposition still allows local governments. The global government only handles issues requiring collective actions such as climate, wars, pandemics, global trade, as well as human rights. Local governments can still manage their individual identities or individuals' cultures, as well as education, traditions, cultural policies, as well as local law, if it just does not contradict to like the principles of the federal government or like the global government. Now, with that said, then, third argument and extension on how this creates massive economic efficiency for the society, right? In the status quo, the world globally wastes enormous amounts of financial capital on the same issues independently. The world economy is currently fragmented by national competition, duplicated systems, and artificial barriers, and countries separately maintain militaries, border systems, trade barriers, conflicting regulations and tariffs, as well as the bureaucracies for their own country's benefit. What does our side do, though? We first eliminate trade barriers. Right now, countries impose visas, tariffs, sanctions, and conflicting regulations to each other because they have the natural instinct to protect themselves and their citizens from possible danger. However, this just increases transportation costs, business uncertainty, production delays, as well as the prices for the consumers, right? Under a global world, we have one common legal framework and basis for the laws. This standardizes policies and tax good, which also helps with free movement of labor and products. This means that because companies no longer need to adapt to products for dozens of like legal systems and pay like multiple tariffs and whatnot, there is also cheaper goods and more stable supply chains on our side of the house. Secondly, though, reduction of military and defense costs. Huge portions of national budget go into weapons or standing militaries and intelligence competitions, as well as border protection. This is economically dead spending because the money itself is used to prepare for destruction rather than improving productivity. On our side and under our world, interstate competition for military needs is absent and significantly decreased as there's no rival sovereign powers. Governments, instead of spending on useless waste of resources, can focus more on individual needs such as education, healthcare, and other innovations as well. Thirdly, in terms of distribution of resources, countries in the status quo compete with each other and unnecessarily duplicate rail or energy systems and hoard essential medical supplies, right? On our side of the house, a comparatively low unnecessary show off of resources or hoarding. Vaccines during pandemics are distributed by medical need rather than national wealth, and infrastructure investment can also be actively targeted underdeveloped regions for long-term growth. Lastly, for labor mobility and productivity. On opposition's world, even highly skilled workers cannot migrate easily, face visa restrictions, and lose opportunities due to their nationality, right? Under our world and under a global government, labor moves more freely to where it's most productive. Human capital is also allocated more efficiently instead of being artificially restricted by borders. Borders may divide our maps, but that does not mean that they divide our crisis, our economy, and our future. Fragmentation of resources does nothing but deter innovation as well as global efficiency. Therefore, so proud to propose.
So, Judge, moving straight into rebuttal, the first argument given by like the government side was how like many problems that lead to international conflict is just because multiple countries are managing separately. So basically, multiple countries are not like the main reason of international conflicts happen because most conflicts come from like deeper disagreements, like religion. Like for example, give like the Gaza-Palestine war. That's also an international conflict, but it did not happen because of like internet like global like conflict, global like superpowers, but it became because of religion. And a single global government will not remove these differences at all. Because like it would also simply just move a conflict into one political system, not into like many different. And next, the second argument was about how a single global government would coordinate resources and policies more efficiently. So basically, centralizing power under one government could actually worsen global problems because one policy would be forced onto billions of people with different needs and values. And if the government makes a poor decision, the entire world suffers at the same time with no alternative systems, nowhere to move to, nowhere to compare, nowhere to rely on. And having multiple countries allows experimentation and flexibility. Lastly, the third argument was a single government will create massive economic efficiency. Basically, this does not automatically improve simply because all countries are merged under one government, because different regions have different resources, industries, labor systems, and economic needs. So basically, one centralized economic policy could hurt many areas while benefiting others because everyone has different needs. And a global government can also create enormous like many things to like match to into different countries and like slow decision making and etc. Now moving on to our team's extension. So our first argument was about how it's easier to get corrupt. So a global government would also make corruption harder to detect and challenge because power would be concentrated so far away from like ordinary citizens, and smaller countries and minority groups can be easily ignored by powerful regions that dominate like the leadership positions and decision making. So basically, since there will be no competing nations to expose like how they're doing something wrong, like or provide alternative systems, corrupt leaders can maintain control much easily. And even if elections exist, worldwide media, laws, and resources would give those in power enormous influences, which can also make nepotism happen with like these kind of like global superpowers. And next, our second argument was about extremely inefficient and how a single government would struggle to respond quickly because every major decision would involve like billions of people. Like everyone has to come like that decision would affect billions of people and with different interests and priorities. So the larger the system, the more layers of bureaucracies created, slowing down policies and emergency responses. So leaders governing the entire world will also become disconnected from local communities, may not fully understand like the regional problems and traditional problems as well. So as a result, smaller areas could wait months or years for action for urgent issues. Now moving on to our team's last argument about how different cultures need different systems. So what do we prove, Judge? So we proved how the single global government cannot effectively govern billions of people with completely different cultures, traditions, religions, economies, and social values. So different societies have different needs, so they require different laws, systems that will fit their people. What's the reasoning behind this, Judge? So the reasoning is that a global government would likely create broad policies in order to govern fairly. However, standardized policies ignore local cultures and values. So some societies prioritize individual freedom, while others value community and tradition more strongly. So some countries want religion closely connected, while others strongly support secularism. So when people feel that leaders far away do not understand or represent them, trust in the government decreases and resentment grows. Let me give an example, John. So for example, education systems differ greatly around the world. Some countries focus heavily on discipline, while others encourage creativity and open discussions. The laws and religion are very different. So countries like Saudi Arabia, who are under like theocracy, connect the religion closely with the government, while countries like France strongly separate religion from the state. So economically, priorities differ as well because wealthier countries may support large welfare programs, while developing countries might focus more on rapid economic growth. So what's the impact? So the impact is significant because culture shapes people's identity and way of life. So if billions of people are ignored or forced into systems that they do not reflect their beliefs, political unrest will increase and people may protest, support separatist movements, or even rebel against the global government. At best, the world becomes unstable and deeply divided. At worst, constant conflict breaks out. So instead of achieving peace and unity, a single global government could create worldwide instability. For all of these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.
If a singularized government stops the worldwide issues that threaten our society, we do not understand why we need to oppose it. Propose. One question to all before moving on. Their side keeps on talking about corruption, but if centralist authority is inherently dangerous, why do opposition benches still support national governments? We don't get that. Make another alternative if you're willing to make this corruption point. Proud to propose. Then second of all, they also talk about different countries need different policies. I'm pretty sure DPM answered this from the very get-go. I don't know why we need to respond for this, but let me respond to this one more. We already told you how that is why proposition will still allow local governance. The global government only handles issues requiring collective action, which includes climate, war, pandemics, global trade, and human rights. But local governments still manage education, traditions, cultural policy, and local laws, and therefore we don't understand why you guys keep sugarcoating and massively overgeneralizing our claim. But that wasn't the intention in the first place. Stop trying to overcomplicate our points and stop trying to massively overgeneralize generalize our points. That's not gonna make you win. Moving on to our first clash then, which is about which side better solves the global issues. This clash is is significantly important for two reasons. First of all, current government systems are not doing an equitable job of solving the global issues. The us versus them situation that is happening to every party makes the actual focus of politics boxed out, which is just really, really bad. Second of all, I think that's the largest focus we have to put in anyway, as the inconsistent speed of solving global issues is the largest problem that happens due to not forming a singularized government anyways. I think that's the issue that we have to solve. Then what do we hear from opposition then? We hear a singular point about larger when how this creates larger impacts when a nation creates a problem in solving global issues. First of all, I think there are fewer chances to make mistakes in the first place, as this debate frames singularized governments as working together and coming up with an easier consensus with one opinion. If that's the case, multiple ideas under the same basis will come together and thus create a consensus, as well as get a lot of support from multiple nations. If that's the case, mistakes will become just way less frequent, making opposition's whole claim seems like an entire overreach that won't likely happen at the very least. But even if you don't buy this point, we at least don't need to fight when solving the problems because we still have the same ideas and same opinions. Meaning to say, when they make a mistake and now need to make a new move, you at least don't need to start a new whole conversation and spend days and days coming up with a single consensus. At least our world seems better in terms of problem solving skills. You would rather swap that and say that our policy will be creating a benefit in terms of that point, and we would rather say your side is the world that creates a harm in solving these global issues at the very least, and that is why our world is systematically better than opposition's role in terms of this point also. But what did we tell you exclusively under proposition's role? We told you very clearly from the start as to why these large consistent debates and fights about perspectives within parties are a problem that risk our society and thus needs to be fixed ASAP. And we also told you why this is only solved through a singularized government, as building this requires peace, resolutions, and cooperation. When it's a given fiat towards proposition that this singularized government is somehow possible and feasible, the benefit we tell you becomes automatically feasible and thus makes propositions clash in terms of solving global issues more exclusive and beneficial. When we compare propositions, prop and ops perspective within this issue, prop wins this scale clearly, as we're the only side that creates the benefit of solving global issues faster. Hence we take the first clash home. Moving on to Clash 2 then, which is about which side creates a safer society for citizens. We hear from Ob a consistent push regarding how countries need different policies because there will be larger impacts when a nation makes mistakes while solving these issues. First of all, this is very under-mechanized, Josh. They don't tell us why this is the case. They just randomly throw out the impacts of what will actually happen without justifying why this will end up happening. This makes their points less feasible even if you buy it. Without the current justification from opposition, this point doesn't seem mechanized enough fully to buy fully. Second of all, even if you become generous and let you buy that, literally that doesn't make any sense. Government policies don't only come out to solve the problems at that moment, but they often come out for preemptive reasons. For example, if one country wants to make a policy within LGBTQ+, I think it's okay for other countries to adopt this as well for a preemptive manners. Problems happen in a sudden manner, and thus preempting in this case doesn't seem like a bad thing, as opposition seems to oversimplify and complicate. I think that is why we think that in terms of this clash, we're better. We'd rather flip that and tell you that this is not the case that we're trying to tell you, at least. And like even with us, we already tell you how there are already like local governments that can manage this. Charlene already told you from the very get-go. We don't know why we don't hear a sufficient response from this. If you're not willing to engage, don't expect to win. Proud to propose.
So, Judge, imagine a world where there's only one government, and the only one government rules and controls 196 countries. Do you really think that the world will run efficiently when one mistake the government makes will affect every single person in the world? We say no. So, good afternoon, Madam Speaker. I'm the opposition whip in today's debate. Before moving on to the clashes, I would like to rebut to a few key points brought to us by the previous speaker. So, the previous speaker, their first argument was about how countries compete for resources and stuff, but as we said, this is not as common, but countries they compete for more land, land and stuff, yes, but the main reason why they have conflicts and stuff isn't just resources and stuff, but as we said, they fight to get for their political party to win, or for them to for one country to have one religion and stuff. So now moving on to the rebuttals, they made two rebuttals. So they rebutted to our first argument saying that oh, but UN isn't an alternative as they don't function anymore, and and they also talked about how they clearly clarified that representatives from each countries will have equal votes and stuff. But Judge, really think about this realistically. So UN is a organization or a foundation made for world's peace, right? After having World War II and World War I and those serious wars and stuff. But they really think about it. In this a foundation made for world peace, there are still inequalities that exist, such as China and USA taking the whole power. So then, Judge, think of this realistically. Won't this happen in their side too? If if like one big foundation can't control which countries are like getting the most power, then it's likely that their side will be inequalities such as USA and China also getting most of the power and stuff. And now we're bonding to what they said to our like other argument. They talked about how there will be local governments, and the local governments will like respect the cultures and like fix like the problems they have in like small like states and stuff. But like, judge, think of this realistically. If there are like local governments and like state governments and stuff, is it likely that there will be like wars and fights between like local governments that are like next to each other and stuff for like more power and stuff? We say yes. So now moving on to the clash. So the first clash I found was about which side is better for like the world and which side is better like if you think of this globally. So the proposition side, they claim local governments help like every like the states like a bit more privately and like respect the cultures and stuff. But they said that they won't have wars, and like one they won't have wars even if like one government is controlling. Think of this realistically. Like, is one government like efficient, and like is it really feasible when like millions of political parties exist and like millions of opinions exist in the world? Like there will be wars between like political parties such as democratic and communist, and it will happen even if they have one government, obviously, when probably do when they are like voting or just like in real life. So, and in the opposition side, we respect cultures and respond quickly to society as we have a one government for each country. So think about this: which is better for world peace? Obviously, our opposition side. Well, because proposition side isn't even as realistic, and they claim that they won't have wars since they will have one government, but this is not true, as there can be millions of wars that happen due to religion and political parties and like different resources too on their side. So therefore, our side wins. And the second question I found was about which is more feasible and which is more realistic. Our side is a lot more realistic, as all they say is that there won't be wars and there will be peace and stability, and like countries won't compete for resources. But this is not true, as even if they have one government, countries will compete for resources no matter what. And it's not about like government, but it's about like human greed. So it's likely that they will still compete for resources. While in our side, we are doing what like what people are doing in the status quo, and we're maintaining the system where like we like there's only one government for one country, and that government deals with everything the country like the problem has. So I'm very proud to oppose.
One. So government team tells you that many international conflicts happen because countries manage problems separately. However, conflict is not caused simply by borders. It comes from deeper disagreements and ideology, religion, culture, and resources. A single global government would not remove those tensions. It will only move them inside one massive political system. Instead of wars between countries, we would likely see internal political struggles, separatist movements, and constant fights for control over the central authority that governs the entire world. So even in government's best case, the global government is still slow, overly bureaucratic, and disconnected from local communities because it must govern billions of people with different priorities and values. Policies will take years to negotiate, and small regions could easily be ignored by a more powerful population. In the worst case, one corrupt or ineffective government controls the world's military, economy, laws with no competing citizens to challenge it. This means one bad decision, economic failure, or authoritarian leader could harm all of humanity simultaneously. Government also claims a global government will coordinate resources and create economic efficiency. But competition between countries is actually one of the biggest reasons the world progresses. So the countries compete economically, scientifically, technologically, which pushes innovation and improvement. So space race between the United States and Soviet Union led to enormous technological advancement because both sides were motivated to have foreign influence. So if there's only one government, one centralized economic system, there's less incentive to innovate, fewer alternative ideas, and greater risk of stagnation. So basically, at best, their world creates a slow, inefficient government that struggles to represent everyone fairly. At worst, it creates the largest concentration of power in human history. However, in our best case, our side provides diversity, competition, and checks on power, which are necessary for innovation, accountability, and long-term stability. And even if in our worst case that we're not we're not very like motivated or progressing that well, it still beats their best case, as their best case is still a slow, inefficient government, and we still have a government that's still like normally like efficient and like fast at making decisions, and also like matching like minority groups as well. So for all of these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose in today's debate, and I'll take this debate home. Thank you. So government team tells you that many international conflicts happen because countries manage problems separately. However, conflict is not caused simply by borders. It comes from deeper disagreements and ideology, religion, culture, and resources. A single global government would not remove those tensions. It will only move them inside one massive political system. Instead of wars between countries, we would likely see internal political struggles, separatist movements, and constant fights for control over the central authority that governs the entire world. So even in government's best case, the global government is still slow, overly bureaucratic, and disconnected from local communities because it must govern billions of people with different priorities and values. Policies will take years to negotiate, and small regions could easily be ignored by a more powerful population. In the worst case, one corrupt or ineffective government controls the world's military, economy, laws with no competing citizens to challenge it. This means one bad decision, economic failure, or authoritarian leader could harm all of humanity simultaneously. Government also claims a global government will coordinate resources and create economic efficiency. But competition between countries is actually one of the biggest reasons the world progresses. So the countries compete economically, scientifically, technologically, which pushes innovation and improvement. So the space race between the United States and Soviet Union led to enormous technological advancement because both sides are motivated to have foreign return. So if there's only one government, one centralized economic system, there's less incentive to innovate, fewer alternative ideas, and greater risk of stagnation. So basically, at best, their world creates a slow, inefficient government that struggles to represent everyone fairly. At worst, it creates the largest concentration of power in human history. However, in our best case, our side provides diversity, competition, and checks on power, which are necessary for innovation, accountability, and long-term stability. And even if in our worst case that we're not we're not very motivated or progressing that well, it still beats their best case, as their best case is still a slow, inefficient government, and we still have a government that's still normally efficient and fast at making decisions, and also matching minority groups as well. So for all of these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose in today's debate, and I'll take this debate home. Thank you. So government team tells you that many international conflicts happen because countries manage problems separately. However, conflict is not caused simply by borders. It comes from deeper disagreements and ideology, religion, culture, and resources. A single global government would not remove those tensions. It will only move them inside one massive political system. Instead of wars between countries, we would likely see internal political struggles, separatist movements, and constant fights for control.
Borders made sense when humanity lived disconnected lives, but in status quo, our economies are global, our technology is global, our crises are global, and even our fears are global. The only thing that remains divided is our politics. A proposition stands for a world where governance finally catches up to reality. So proud to propose. 2 point outs then. Firstly, their side keeps on rebutting to our points, but never really proves why and how their side can solve this problem. If centralized authority is inherently dangerous, why do opposition benches still try to support national governments, right? But also, if corruption already exists across hundreds of governments, why is fragmentation automatically better than one accountable system? Their side tried to mitigate our points, but at the end of the day, they did not prove why their side was able to reach their idealistic benefits. This is a debate. Please engage. So proud to propose. Secondly, though, their side talked about how they support the UN, right? I don't know why, but then Wood comes up to the podium and says that somehow the UN is also very unfair. We think this is a massive contradiction their side brings up to their entire case. DPM already proved to you how ineffective, stagnant, and corrupt these international systems are. There are enough feudal systems, and literally the majority of UN's military is backed by the US. So at the end of the day, this in and of itself shows how corrupt it is and vulnerable it is to corruption. There's no response to this after ELO, so we assume that their side whole case built up on the premise that the UN is ideal actually falls on this case. The difference on our world is that there's no independent national militaries competing internationally anymore. Conflicts become more like internal disputes within one system on our side of the house. Now, moving on to our main question then about which side actually solves the global issues better. Our side proposes a single global authority that has the power to produce binding laws and enforce them worldwide, right? We already explained how unlike the current international organizations and individual governments that lack enforcement power, a global government can actually ensure that all nations follow through on commitments to address issues such as climate change, pandemics, and other crises. This unified decision-making process leads to way quicker, more coordinated action, which is very essential for solving urgent issues effectively. I already mentioned this in my DPM speech, why we obviously allow local governments to solve safety issues, right? We all want a safe environment and a safe society, and we don't think this will be allowed, or we don't think allowing local governments is a sufficient problem that will actually hurt our policy anyway. We don't get why you're making such a big deal out of it. At the end of the day, proposition asks the question, why should arbitrary lines on a map matter more than humanity's collective future? So proud to propose.